Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim, and this video is the last lecture for the course of BMN 514. Greed is good. Greed is a productive force for good. Greed produces greater benefit for society than caring or charity. Bernard Mandeville, who is a political philosopher, asserted that private vices yield public benefit. And the Scottish philosopher, whose name is Adam Smith, pointed to self-love as the driving force behind economic growth and progress. Although Adam Smith regarded benevolence as a supreme virtue and the key to creating a truly flourishing and happy society, he understood that individuals in the marketplace are motivated by a much narrower concern for their own interest. The constraint imposed by law and the forces of market competition did not eliminate selfishness or the desire for power and social status. The increased productivity created by the division of labor does not prevent gross inequality of income and wealth in society. It was not until the latter half of the 20th century that economics openly embraces the word greed. An economic system runs on greed. This shift was largely a response to moral concerns about the excesses of corporate capitalism and the growing disparity of wealth and power, separating the world's richest and poorest nations. Smith Friedman said that Nirvana is not for this world. There is no paradise. Of course, we've got a lot of people who are poorly off. But if you look at it over time, the well-being of ordinary people has been the main thing that has been improved by economic growth and development. So long as trade is voluntary, there is no limit to how much anyone is morally entitled to have, even if this results in large-scale inequality in society. Greed produces greater benefit for society than caring or charity. Economic behavior is motivated by individual interests and desires. This hardly seems conducive to the tranquility or inner contentment that philosophers have traditionally associated with happiness. Adam Smith discerned a clear threat to happiness in the restless striving for riches, power, and social status. Indeed, the ego-driven striving for wealth tends to undermine our real happiness, which consists chiefly in tranquility. Tranquility is a state of inner contentment or peace of mind. Tranquility is free from stress and worry, free from the disturbing passions of hatred and anger. Tranquility is free from the guilt of wrongdoing and free from the anxiety and restlessness of incessant desire. Without this tranquility, there can be no enjoyment. And where there is perfect tranquility, there is scarce anything which is not capable of amusing. Here is Adam Smith's parable of the poor man's son who longs for the luxuries and convenience afforded by great wealth, believing that these things represent the means of happiness. Adam Smith observed that unethical deception causes people to admire wealth and greatness more than wisdom and virtue. However, Charles Griswold notes the comic irony in Adam Smith's suggestion that progress and civilization are made possible by a deception that plunges us into the world of unceasing work, of bettering our condition, and therefore of unhappiness. Modern critics of capitalism have complained that it promotes economic growth at the expense of virtue and happiness. Let's examine the concept of greed in Buddhist thought. In Pali term, greed is lobha. Lobha indicates an intense, self-centered longing or desire that not only produces suffering in this life, but create the conditions for unhappy rebirth in the next. In Anguttara Nikaya, the sutra named Nidana Sutta says that any action performed with greed born of greed, caused by greed, originating from greed, wherever one's selfhood turns up, there that action will ripen. Where that action ripens, there one will experience its fruit, either in this very life that has arisen or further along in the sequence. In Buddhist teaching, greed, lobha, hatred, and delusion are identified as unwholesome root or defilement of mind that give rise to unskillful moral action. The element of greed is also expressed by the word raga. Raga conveys the sense of lust or passion. In Adita Parinaya Sutta, which is called Fire Sermon, the Buddha explains that suffering arises in those who burn with the fire of passion, with the fire of aversion, with the fire of delusion. So, with the fire of three poisons, that person will be suffering. There are more terms to represent greed in Pali. The term lobha and raga are very closely related to abhijja, covetousness, and tanya, craving, thirst. The Pali lexicon lists all four terms as a synonym for good reason, because all point to the same deep-seated longing or desire that drives the self-centered pursuit of worldly happiness. Suffering arises because we want things to be other than the way they really are. We long for stability and permanence that do not exist in the realm of our experience. The Buddhist path to liberation involves an inward transformation of the individual in which mental defilement of greed, hatred, and delusion are gradually overcome through the cultivation of non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, or in their positive transformation such as generosity, loving-kindness, and wisdom. In practical terms, this means establishing oneself firmly in good ethical conduct, sila, and developing a greater capacity to act with unselfish concern for the welfare of others. This is crucially supported by the practice of meditative concentration, samadhi. The path of liberation is said to be born in that person whose mind becomes steady, settles down, grows unified and concentrated. In this tranquil state, one is able to gain direct insight into the true nature of reality. With this insight, the meditator begins to disidentify with the various sensations, thoughts, and emotions that arise in the continuing flow of conscious experience, affirming that this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. With the end of craving and self-making come to an end of the cycle of suffering and rebirth. With the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion thus finally extinguished, one experiences the complete and perfect happiness of nirvana. In Anana Sutta from Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha describes 4 kinds of happiness or bliss, sukha, which can be experienced by householders. What are 4 kinds of happiness? The first, the happiness of having material wealth, which is experienced by those who earn their wealth by hard working and perseverance. Material wealth includes the satisfaction that one derives from the fruit of labor performed well and honestly, as well as the contentment that comes from knowing that one has enough. As Lily de Silva notes, one could have great wealth, but if one does not experience a sense of contentment with what one has, one cannot really enjoy material wealth or the pleasure of having. The amassing of wealth of such a person is like trying to fill a bottomless vessel. Second kind of happiness is the happiness of enjoying material wealth, which is experienced by those who use wealth wisely to promote well-being for themselves and others. This means avoiding the extremes of extravagance and miserliness and using wealth for the purpose of making merit. That is, being generous and open-handed, attending to those in need, and delighting in the distribution of alms. Another kind of happiness is the happiness of being deathless, which is experienced by those who conscientiously fulfill all their obligations to others, both financial and social. This means living within one's income and discharging any specific duties that one might have to family, friends, and the wider community. The last type of happiness is the happiness of being blameless, which is experienced by those who, because of their generosity and good conduct, they enjoy the deep satisfaction of having a clear conscience. The happiness of being blameless is considered the greatest of the 4 kinds of happiness because it derives from the virtue of one's character as exhibited in thought, speech, and action. From a Buddhist standpoint, it is important to emphasize here that wealth should be pursued with a view to creating the material conditions for genuine well-being and spiritual growth. One must take special care to avoid watering the seeds of craving and grasping. In this respect, life in modern commercial society presents some formidable challenges, and especially so in a consumer-based economy where the appetite for consumption is constantly being stimulated by advertising and reinforced by sophisticated marketing strategies designed to exploit the desire to be or become a certain kind of a person. In this environment, Bodhibhikkhu writes that we are led to believe that by acquiring ownership over more and more goods, we thereby come closer to the good, to becoming happier, more contented, more deeply fulfilled human beings. But this sleight of hand deception only lures us deeper into the entanglement of craving and grasping. Bodhibhikkhu states that at the heart of the consumerist culture, we find this puzzling paradox that when we pursue wealth as an end in itself, instead of arriving at true happiness, we only seem further removed from it. Those who enjoy the most abundant wealth and exercise the greatest power are rarely models of contentment. P.A. Payutta wrote the book titled Buddhist Economics. Subtitle is A Middle Way for the Marketplace. Payutta explains that the Buddhist concept of contentment does not entail the absence of desire, but rather the absence of a certain kind of desire. For example, tanya. Tanya means self-centered craving for sensual pleasure. This craving leads to restlessness and exhaustion in the individual, strife in society, and unsustainable consumptions. However, contentment is compatible with another form of desire, namely chanda. Chanda means the wholesome desire for well-being. Chanda focuses on things that contribute to a genuine flourishing, such as good nutrition, adequate housing, health care, education, and spiritual growth. According to Payutta, the path to true contentment involves reducing the artificial desire for sense pleasure while actively encouraging and supporting the desire for quality of life. In Buddhism, consumption is limited by an appreciation of moderation and the objective of well-being. Moderation in the Buddhist sense means knowing how much is enough. Moderation is an awareness of that optimum point where the enhancement of true well-being coincides with the experience of satisfaction. One of canonical literature, Samhita Nikaya, there's one sutra named Donapaka Sutta. In this sutra, the Buddha instructs King Pasenadi in the benefit of moderation as it pertains to the consumption of food. The Buddha says that when a person is constantly mindful and knows when enough food has been taken, all their afflictions become more slender. They age more gradually, protecting their lives. By focusing on the goal of well-being, mindfulness of consumption promotes not only a healthier and happier life, but also the spiritual goal of reducing one's greed and attachment to sense pleasure. The problem lies in that a comparative, monetized economy puts us under continual pressure to want more and more. Buddhism sets the limit in a way that we feed our needs and not our greed. Buddhism is not opposed to economic growth per se. Instead, it encourages a skillful approach that is both socially and environmentally sustainable. Buddhism provides people with opportunity to achieve well-being for themselves and contribute in meaningful ways to the well-being of others. Buddhism sees productivity and responsible consumption as social goods and is amenable to developing and using material and technological resources for the purpose of alleviating the suffering caused by poverty, hunger, homelessness, disease, and lack of opportunity for inward growth. Buddhism discourages forms of production and consumption that are harmful and diminish the overall quality of life. This ethical approach to development might not generate the rapid growth made possible in economies that foster a consumerist mentality, but the result promises to be a more peaceful, just, and sustainable society. In Anguttara Nikaya, there is a sutta named Patthakama Sutta. In the Patthakama Sutta, the Buddha cautioned those whose hearts are overcome by covetousness and unrighteous greed. They spoil their happiness and their reputation by doing what should not be done and neglecting their duties. The natural desire for pleasure can be restrained through conscious moral effort. Happiness grows in proportion to our ability to limit our wants and promote the conditions for true well-being, and it continues to grow as we expand our capacity for generosity, kindness, and compassion. The sentiment that inspires us to pursue riches and avoid poverty not only promote economic growth, but also reinforce our lack of concerns for the poor and the wretched. As social beings, our happiness depends on more than just having our most basic need met. It is also important that we are seen by others with mutual sympathy. The early Buddhist texts assign an important role to government in creating the conditions for human flourishing. There is a need for policies that reflect a humane concern for the well-being and prosperity of every member of society. There is sutra in Digha Nikaya named Chakravartisivanada Sutta. This sutra identifies poverty as a root cause of moral corruption and social decay. In this discourse, the reader is invited to imagine a society in a state of disintegration brought on by the failure of government to address the material needs of the people. The situation is made steadily worse by disastrous policies aimed at stopping poverty-driven theft. First, by simply giving property to individuals arrested for stealing. So, in pure environment, people start to steal what they are given. First, by simply giving properties to individuals arrested for stealing, then the thieves increase. And then there's no way to control the thieves. So when the policy fails, then government try to deter theft by the extreme measure of executing offenders. The downward spiral into moral depravity and violence is finally stemmed when a few like-minded people begin to realize that their own flourishing depends on the flourishing of those around them. Therefore, these like-minded people undertake to form a new community based on commitment to moral precept and doing good for the sake of others. In continuation of the discourse of Chakravartisivadana Sutta, by dedicating themselves to the practice of generosity, kindness, and compassion toward their fellow beings, they gradually re-establish the conditions required for peace, prosperity, and happiness. Poverty and social instability arise when people are unable to contribute to the welfare of others or to be the object of their reciprocal goodwill and assistance. From a Buddhist perspective, it is the responsibility of government to create real opportunities for work that is satisfying and enable people to support themselves and contribute in meaningful ways to the well-being of others. Another discourse from Digha Nikaya named Kuttadanta Sutta, the Buddha recommends to the Brahmin a plan of economic development that provides avenues for people to work and flourish together. In addition to providing direct assistance to those with acute need, the plan includes measures such as providing seed for those who farm and raise livestock, providing subsidies to those who work in trade, and guaranteeing a fair wage and food for those employed in government service. According to this view, if people have the freedom to engage in work that is enriching and allows them to live with dignity and perform their duties, society will be peaceful, prosperous, and happy. The primary aim of the Buddha's teaching was not to effect social or political reform. The social and economic views presented in these canonical texts must always be understood in light of the overarching soteriological goal of liberation. Early Buddhist discussions of the conditions for spiritual awakening and social welfare acknowledged the usefulness of economic freedom for alleviating forms of suffering that trap people in the prison of greed, hatred, and delusion. Adam Smith's idea of a truly flourishing and happy society is one whose members are bound together by mutual love and affection. It is only by restraining our selfish tendencies and caring more for others that we may hope to produce that harmony of sentiment and passions on which our mutual flourishing depends. From a Buddhist perspective, one thing is abundantly clear, that is, achieving his vision of a more humane and enlightened society requires that we move beyond the familiar libertarian nostrums that greed is good, what's mine is mine, and whatever the market produces is fair. Government works best by creating policies that reflect and encourage the compassionate concern for the well-being and happiness of every member of society. Question 1. The Buddhist concept of contentment always entails the absence of desire. True or false? Always absence of desire? Sometimes some kind of desire is required, so you can find the answer. Second question. The primary aim of the Buddha's teaching was not to effect social or political reform. True or false? You will submit quiz answer to my email, and please write down assignment of week 9 of December 6th. And this will be the last assignment before the lecture final. In a lecture final, you will have an essay question. Maybe I might ask about your idea of happiness, meaning of happiness in the context of material wealth or in relation to spiritual growth. So essay title will be instructed detailed when you receive exam sheet. And you will have 1 week to complete essay, so you will not have a time constraint. So this is the last lecture of course BMN 514. Thank you very much.